you said that we wrote a statute, or the legislature did, and it passed,
Yeah.
never signed it, where it said explicitly that schools can't force mass children.
That's right.
And then I think there was like, unless the governor says there's an emergency or something.
That's right.
But the Supreme Court struck it down, or in part struck it down. And so now the schools can force masks on children.
That's right.
And so I guess my question would be, does government have, that's a twofold question, does government have power that we don't grant it in constitutions?
I think that is true at the federal level. The federal level, the United States Constitution is primarily a list of what the federal government can do. We call it the enumerated powers.
Mm-hmm.
It's widely understood that states are different because states are the ones that form the federal government, that they have wide police powers to legislate on things like health, morality, and general welfare, but subject to other constitutional protections that have already been enshrined.
Okay, so you're saying that the states do have power that the people didn't grant it in the Constitution?
I guess what I'm saying is, I think the state the state is not, every power that it has is not something that it was specifically given. If you're talking about the idea of popular sovereignty, where, the people are the sovereigns, then I guess you'd say no, but it's not, I don't think that's a particularly clear question.
Well, the reason I'm getting at it is because it sounds like that we are reliant upon a court servants, if you will, trustees, to be free in our state. And that seems backwards to me. Like, if I have life, liberty, and property, and accepted rights, like due process of law and all these other things, these rights are accepted from government control. But then I hear lawyers tell us that we can have our rights abrogated by statutes. I just can't figure out where you're getting these ideas from. And if it's like case law or I don't know how government has power we don't grant it. And if that's the case, then are we, would you say we still have freedom? Or is it's dependent upon servants to be free?
I mean, I'm not sure I understand the question. I mean, to the extent that what you're talking about is that we use courts to enforce rights, I would simply ask you, like, how else do you want to do that? Like in a civil society, yeah, you would use a court to enforce your rights. There have been times where rights are sort of enforced, at the barrel of a gun or the end of a sword. You could certainly, I suppose, you could do that if you felt like your rights were being infringed on, but sort of the way that we've chosen to do that is through courts.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely, what I'm getting at is I think the court, I'm less concerned with who sits in the seats. I'm more concerned with them doing and saying what the law is. So my understanding of the courts in our Republican system of government is that the law and the Constitution precede the judiciary. And so the courts are not given power to make law. They are to tell what the law is, which is already created, which actually created the court, which the people wrote. So yeah, I mean, I think we're dancing into some dangerous territory when we're relying on a vote in elections, which obviously have some concerns as far as legitimacy. If we're relying upon our vote in order to be free, further when it says, like in the Oklahoma Constitution, Article 2, Section 1, that the people have all political power. And then, like you had mentioned, the Supreme Court's doing a lot of good stuff. Trump v. USA talks about the American people are the sovereign. And so it's just weird to me when I hear Gorsuch kind of teaching some fundamentals and then lawyers saying that I'm required to do things against rights because a court said. Do you understand kind of some of my struggle with that? Like, am I making any sense?
Not really. Is there a question?
Can I?
they're not bound by the president who appoints them. And so they are free to interpret the law as they see it, because they are truly independent.
Asking on that, you said independence. When you say independence, do you mean like that we're supposed to have independent branches of government, like separation of powers? That's certainly maybe a piece of that.
Yeah. Well, this was the statement that I found as they explained the independent. Judges, legislators, and executives are all accountable to the people.
Yeah, which is
not above the people and not independent of the people.
And then when they say independence too, like he said, they're not bound by the governor. Well, they are bound by the constitutions, and if we mistakenly give them the give into the notion that they can interpret the Constitution, well, they just elevated themselves above the Constitution.
Well, someone has to interpret it.
Well,
I mean, you tell me who you'd like to interpret it if it were a court.
So how can a court or a servant interpret the Constitution and not be bound by it, and still be bound by it?
How are they not bound by it by interpreting it? I mean,
well, if they're interpreting it, then you're giving them ways to move beyond it.
I would argue no, not if it's done well. There are certainly different types of constitutional interpretations, some that lend themselves to that. Why do we talk about? So, for instance, I think if you believe, there are people who believe that the Constitution is a living document and that it sort of means whatever I want it to mean on any given day, and it can adjust based on, norms and societal changes. That certainly does lend itself, I think, to what you're talking about. But if you're simply saying there is a dispute over what this means, someone has to decide. The question, I think the best way to answer that is, what did it mean to the people who ratified it when it was ratified?
Sure.
What was its original public meaning? And I believe that if you do that,
Well,
you're not making yourself above the Constitution.
And you're not interpreting either.
Well, sure
I would
you are.
argue. I think you're just telling what the law is and what it was when it was written.
Yeah, but if there's a disagreement about what the law is, interpretation is necessary.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what allowed some of this funny business to begin with. That
Okay.
idea.
And what was the fourth one? Sorry.
Judges do not have the final word about the constitutionality of a law. Because it's saying officials in the legislative branch and the executive branch took an oath to uphold the Constitution, not necessarily the decision of the judges. And this is the one that really got me, because it's like the Constitution is a written document.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't believe it's a living document. It's a written document that says, in these are the principles that we judge things by. The judges look at it and see, do it meet the criteria that are written in our Constitution? If it meet the criteria that are written in our Constitution, there is no interpretation to make.
There are a lot of provisions where that's really easy. So let's take the United States Constitution says you have to be 36 to be president. Let's say someone who's 28 decides to run for president. We can all agree that the Constitution prohibits that person from running, and we got to keep them off the ballot. But there are provisions that are not that cut and dry, right? Like, what does the phrase "due process of law" mean? Right? Like, that's a question that's up for interpretation, because there are any number of different scenarios that might pop up. So yes, the people obviously do have and are and can be a check on a court that they feel like either got it wrong or didn't uphold their rights to the degree that they would like. But ultimately, at some level, somebody has to, like, we can't have, I don't think, how many people live in the United States? 40 million? Is it more or less, something like that?
350 million.
Is it 350 million? I think I was thinking of maybe one of the bigger states. You just can't have 350 million interpretations of a clause, and everybody kind of interprets it the way they want. So there has to be some level of popular sovereignty.